There are still a few people missing, but we can assume they're the people who had a heart attack this morning when they jumped up and said "Sippity doo dah." So I don't need to wait for them. That's why they call people who've died the late Mrs. this and the late Mr. that. So anyhow, back down to business. I hear explaining that. And back to business. The meditation which we're doing here, as I've mentioned to many people in their interviews and also emphasized in the talks, the first thing which I'm encouraging in this retreat is to get enough rest and stillness to build up one's mindfulness. And when that awareness, and you know what's going on, and the mind is powerful and sensitive enough to work with the meditation objects like the breath and deeper things, only then can we really get into this meditation and have a sense of really being on top of meditating on the breath or these other stages of the beautiful breath and nimittas and stuff. So my first aim of this retreat was to be able to encourage that build-up of mindfulness. But once mindfulness is built up, then we can actually start to focus that mindfulness on the appropriate places. And it's through the focus of mindfulness that we can actually start to get a very deep state of meditation and start to arouse the bliss states and start to see even more clearly. Once we have a sufficient beginning mindfulness, which is not easy, most people don't have that when they first come on a retreat, they're too tired or too scattered. Once we have that sufficient amount of mindfulness, then we can start really focusing it on something like the breath, and we find it's effective. We can watch the breath, we can work with it, we can develop it, and it's not that hard. Again, one of the reasons people have a difficult time meditating on something like the breath is that mindfulness is not strong enough to be able to hold and handle it. So today I'm going to talk about what you do when you have got a strong enough mindfulness and how you should focus it and work with it to increase the mindfulness and increase its power and depth of understanding. It's almost as if that when you first start meditation, the first place you sort of focus to get mindfulness coming up is what I call the space between the observer and the observed. That's where one starts from. And so when you first start meditating, it doesn't really matter at all what you're experiencing, whether you're seeing a breath, seeing a nimitta, seeing even a sexual fantasy, having restlessness, sloth and torpor. What you're experiencing is not so important at the beginning. What really is important is to notice the space between you, the observer, and what you're watching, to make sure that that has peace, that has stillness, that has calm, that is kindness, that is gentleness. And it's very, very effective, actually, to focus the attention when you start meditating. For example, when you go home and you get back from work, forget about the breath or what's in front of your mind. Forget about, what's inside watching. But pay more attention to how you're watching, how you're observing, how you are meditating. Not what you're meditating on or who's doing the meditating, but the how. Because it's in the how, I call that the space between the observer and the observed. You can actually see where the problems start from in meditation. In that gap between you, the observer, and the observed, that's where you can have this craving or expectation or even fear and frustration. Because the frustration, the fear, expectation, desire, it doesn't live in the object which you're watching, nor does it actually live in yourself. As the Buddha kept on saying, the mind is pure. But it's what is in between the two of you. And if you focus on that, you can start to see that, I may be slothful, I may be sleepy, but what's most important is how I'm sleepy. Am I afraid of that? Am I embarrassed about it? Am I just struggling with it? Am I making bad karma with it? And if you are, then you know the future is not going to work very satisfactorily. Sure, you may be able to bust through that sloth and torpor, but you just have restlessness or frustration or whatever afterwards. You're building up the seeds for problems in the future, which is what we mean by the law of karma. So when you start meditation, make sure it's how you're meditating. Make sure you're meditating with peace, with kindness, with this is good enough, I'm happy to be here. Letting go, just giving myself to this moment, I don't really expect anything from it. With that sort of focus at the beginning of the meditation, that's where mindfulness starts to grow and build up. And you keep that up until the mindfulness is strong enough, you can watch a subtle object like the breath. Because you know what it's like many times, you know, ordinary days you can try and watch the breath, 1 or 2 or 3 breaths and then it's gone, you go somewhere else. The mindfulness is not strong enough to hold it. You know, it's like sort of you becoming a brain surgeon and all you've done in your life is peel potatoes. You're going to make a great mess of somebody's brain if you even can't peel a potato properly. So you have to train first of all to get that skill up. The skill here is a mindfulness to be able to see, watch, observe very carefully and see the worth and the beauty in something and also not to interfere with it. So the skills of mindfulness. I repeat those 3 skills. The ability to observe, the ability to see the worth in something and the ability not to interfere with it. So the 3 skills of mindfulness. And once you sort of develop those 3 skills, and because the mindfulness becomes strong, then you can use that mindfulness to develop the meditation path. You can take sort of the breath, and because you are aware, the mindfulness is strong, you can actually see the breath clearly. Now how many times that people say, what am I supposed to watch? Say, watch the breath. The feeling which tells you going in and going, your breath is going in and going out. But what is that? Because the mindfulness is not strong enough, it's just too subtle, you just can't see it. Or you can see it for just short periods of time, you can't see the real full breath. But as the mindfulness develops and gets stronger and stronger, and I ask someone to please watch the breath, and it's just so easy to watch it. Like many of you probably already now know that it's so easy to watch the breath now, this 4th or 5th day of a retreat. Whereas when you came here it was just so difficult. And the reason is your mindfulness is getting stronger and brighter. So the subtle things are more easy to be seen. And you need to build up that power of mindfulness to develop the meditation to even more flimsy, gossamer, subtle objects. It's very easy to see a train, but it's very, very hard, say, to see a bacteria. And some is big and solid, and the other one is just very, very small and hard to pin down. It's the same with these breaths. You start with big things, and then you start to get these smaller things and more thin things are harder to actually to know. But you need a powerful mindfulness to be able to follow that and to be able to keep it in mind. So the brightness of the mind allows you to watch the breath. And also that mindfulness can keep those instructions in mind, which is also what we mean by mindfulness. And one of those instructions is that you see the beauty, the worth in something. To really see that this is good enough. To be happy to be here. And to do that, in some objects like the breath, you have to deliberately look for its worth, for its beauty. Because that worth and that beauty, that happiness, the intrinsic happiness which is in the object of your meditation, does become the glue which sticks your mindfulness onto it and stops you going somewhere else. Once you start to see the breath as worthwhile, and then even beautiful, of course it will hold the mindfulness there. And the point is here, you can't push mindfulness onto an object and push it and keep it there from your force. You have to imbue the object you're aware of with enough joy, with enough happiness, with enough worth, but it pulls the mindfulness onto it. Which is why that sometimes when we're focusing, especially on the breath, we can start to play some games with the breath, start to have a little bit of commentary with the breath, just to make the breath interesting, to make it worthwhile to look at. And one of the things you can do is just to think of all the things you don't have to do now. Now use like the negativity of, I don't have to go to work today, it's a Tuesday. And all my friends and colleagues, they're at the office now, slaving away. And all I have to do is just watch the breath. Even when I'm at home, I have to answer the telephone or write these letters. But now, all I've got to do is just to watch this breath. Sometimes I have to go here and go there and worry about so many things in life, but now all I've got to do is to watch the breath. I have family problems, business problems, health problems, but now all I have to do is to watch the breath. So you value the peace and the freedom of a simple object like the breath. And you convince yourself, you give a little commentary of why it's worth watching the breath and how wonderful it is. Let alone that if you have some experience of meditation and you know this breath is going to lead you into some very powerful and deep states of peace and insight, and then you can actually see more of the value in the breath. But early on in my meditation career, when my mind used to wander off onto all sorts of things, I tried to use force to bring the mind back. Wander off again, bring the mind back. And that became so endless and frustrating. And, as I've been saying for many years now, willpower is not the way to go in meditation. Always use wisdom power. Wisdom power. Use your insight, your understanding. Find out what the problem is. And what I saw as a problem was that I didn't like the breath. It wasn't interesting enough. And that was why I went somewhere else, to find something more interesting, more fascinating, more fun to watch. It was just because of disinterest that I wandered off. And to be able to solve that problem, what I needed to do is find more of interest in the breath. Imbue it with some more worth. When I realized it was worthwhile to watch the breath, and it much more worthwhile than all these other thoughts and dreams and stuff, then it became much easier for my mindfulness to stay focused there. I could see the reason why. So please convince yourself of why it's important to watch the breath. Don't use willpower, just use that wisdom power. And when it's really important for you to watch the breath, then it becomes so easy to watch the breath. For example, I had one of my experiences the first year in Thailand in the new monastery, Wat Nana Chad. I was one of the first 6 months of that monastery. And we used to sleep out on the floor, on the ground, in the jungle, watch the snakes slither past on the other side of your mosquito net at night. I'm not joking, that happened almost every night. And the worst part of that was because Ajahn Chah wanted to encourage this monastery for Westerners to begin, and there was no facilities there at all. He would come every evening, we'd do some evening chanting, and then some meditation for an hour, then he'd give a talk. The trouble was, there was it was literally under the trees. He actually sat on an old termite mound, which raised him up, so we could see him when he was teaching, and all the villagers would come. And the trouble was that this was the time we started meditating. At the time, all the mosquitoes came out looking for their dinner. At the worst possible time, that sort of late evening. And those mosquitoes at that monastery were ferocious. And they were big, there were many of them, and many of you know this story. I used to play a game with another American monk who was just ordained just a short time after me. So we used to sit next together. We used to play this game of counting the mosquitoes on your arm to see who could count the most. We used to get up to about 60 or 70, all at one time. And after that number you couldn't count them anymore because they were too close together to distinguish. It was just like one mosquito, and if you listen very carefully you could hear the slurp as the blood was sucked out of your arm by 60 mosquitoes simultaneously. Now that is an exaggeration. I did not hear any slurp. Well, I just say that to make the story interesting. But it was about 50 or 60 mosquitoes. I don't know the exact number, but somewhere of that order. And you can imagine how irritating that is. One mosquito is bad enough, but so many of them, all over you. And the trouble was, because your teacher, Ajahn Chah, was there, no way you could swat them, because all the visitors were there, nor could you flick them off. And the worst thing, you couldn't run, because all these other Thai monks were sitting there so still. And you had your pride, like a Westerner had his pride. If those Thai monks can hack it, so can I. I only found out afterwards, later on, that the Thai monks actually didn't get bitten so much by the mosquitoes because actually their blood vessels were a little bit lower in their skin. The Westerners were much closer to the surface of the skin, so we actually exuded off more heat and more carbon dioxide, and so we were actually the magnets for the mosquitoes. And that's why, the Westerners, we all recovered with welts from the mosquitoes, and these time monks had nothing on them. So no wonder they sat still. I thought they were just being tough guys. But anyhow, it was just really, really hard. And the only way I could eventually sort of cope with that for an hour sitting being bitten like that was I had to watch the breath. Because the alternative, my mind would not wander off to food or fantasies or past or future. The main object of my sensory awareness when I wasn't watching the breath was just this terrible, itch and irritation all over your arms and your head and your shoulders. But when you were focused on the breath, you could only focus on one thing and everything else just disappeared. And that was how I relieved myself from the problem of having those terrible mosquitoes. I focused on the breath very quickly because I had to. It was really worthwhile to do that. And I got some really nice meditation those evenings. So actually, I thank those mosquitoes for teaching me how to focus. Even though it was a negative thing, perhaps if anyone doesn't have any good meditation, I'll go and import some mosquitoes here into the room. Thousands of them. But anyhow, that's only, we'll never do that. Because that was almost like a tough guy way of doing it, and I don't really encourage that anymore. The best way of doing it is actually seeing the positive side of the breath, not the negative side of being somewhere else. When you can see the worth in something, the beauty in something, it's very easy to stay there. So if you have restlessness and you can't stay with, say, the breath, ask yourself why. It's always because you think something else is more worthwhile, that something else is more interesting, that something else is more valuable. And all you need to do is just to do a new PR job on the breath. And convince yourself it's more valuable, more interesting, more worthwhile. Just to be able to stay there long enough. And this is actually how we develop focusing. By seeing the value in something, seeing it's more worthwhile. And once you learn how to do this, you go deeper in the meditation, there becomes a much more intrinsic worth in each of these stages of meditation. When you get to the full awareness of the breath, everyone feels it's peaceful. And that peace is nice, it's pleasant, it's delightful. And so when you're watching the breath here, you've already got the mindfulness up, you're watching the space between you, and this is actually when you're watching the object and seeing its worth and beauty. You don't just watch the breath. Mindfulness is actually looking for what's worthwhile in here, and its value, and how peaceful and how lovely it is. And when it gets into that habit of looking for the beauty in something, then when it actually gets to the peaceful breath, it actually does appear beautiful, it does appear delightful. And when you get to that stage, when you have seen the delight in the breath, it's so easy to focus. In fact, you can't sort of take your mind away from that object. The bell rings for breakfast and you just carry on sitting there. Somebody makes a noise, you can't even hear them. You've got aches in the legs or the back, you don't bother with them because you're having too good a time with the object of awareness. You're starting to see the beauty. So the mindfulness, at this stage, the second part of focusing, at first it's between you and the object, at this it's seeing the beauty in the object. You realize that that is the way you sustain your attention anyway. Not through force or persistence, but through that wisdom power which sees this thing is really worth looking at. And eventually seeing it is quite beautiful and delightful. And the reason that's important to take the focusing even deeper is because once you see the beauty in something, you need less effort. When you have less effort, you have more energy for mindfulness. The mindfulness gets stronger and more brilliant. You can see deeper into something. You can actually start to see the real beauty in it. The snowball effect starts to happen. A feedback loop where the more beauty you see, the stronger your mindfulness, the more beauty you can see, which empowers the mindfulness even more, and you see more joy, which makes the mindfulness stronger yet, and you start to see bliss. And when the bliss starts to come up, your mindfulness is really strong, and you can see even more beautiful stuff in there. That's how this focusing starts and begins and develops. However, that every now and again when you're focusing and having a good time, there is Distractions. Somebody does their morning chanting before we begin. We call that snoring. There was a lot of morning chanting this morning. So, sometimes that can be quite distracting. So how do you deal with, the snoring, the burping, the, beepers going off, or something else happening outside, or the aches and pains in the body? The only reason why it is a distraction is because when that happens, you think that snoring, that noise, that pain is more important to you than, say, your breath. You give that distraction the importance. Now really all one needs to do is actually to never give any distraction any importance at all. Certainly not more importance than the meditation object. So breath is more important. So if someone's snoring, that's their job. They're tired, poor things. Let them snore. So the leg is aching and paining. Just the leg's doing its thing. None of my business. I've got 2 legs anyway, I can spare one. Or whatever else it is, that it's just not my business. And other people, they have their beepers, or they make a noise, or they shuffle around, or whatever it is. Oh, that's their business, nothing to do with me. I'm not the policeman on this retreat. I'm just a meditator. So when you don't give it importance, it's not a distraction anymore. That's what Ajahn Brahm meant. It's not the sound disturbs you, it's you disturb the sound. You give it importance. And a good way of visualizing that, and it's another part of focusing, it's a framework for focusing, which I've always found very, very effective, is to imagine the mind like a screen, like a TV screen, or like a video screen, like a movie theatre screen. And what's important with screens is what's in the middle, the center of the screen, because that is what you focus on. And it's like you have, the old simile, when you are watching a TV, when you first turn on the TV, you can see the edges of the screen. You know if it's a square TV or a round TV. You know if it's one of these liquid crystal sets, the plasma screen TVs, which is huge, or whether it's a small TV. But I challenge you, the next time you turn on the TV, see if you can just notice, once you're in that movie, in that soap opera, or whatever else it is you're watching, how big is the screen when you're actually watching it? Whether you're looking at a small TV or a big TV, in the mind it's exactly the same. Because what happens is, as soon as you start watching, the edges of the screen disappear. You go into the center and you get a mental image. And that's nothing to do with the size of your TV set. I've often said the only time the size of your TV set matters is when it's not turned on. That's the only time you see how big it is. When it's turned on and you're looking, the big TV, the small TV looks exactly the same size. Just basic psychology. And I told that story in the last retreat I gave you. So getting these plasma screen TVs is a waste of money. You're only impressing people who visit, who can see how big that TV is. But as for your own enjoyment when you're looking at it, it appears in your mind, in perception, exactly the same as if you'll have a small TV. There was a couple here who came up to me afterwards in the interview and said, "Oh, thank you so much. As soon as we left here, we were going to buy a plasma screen TV. Now we've seen what you said, we don't need to. We'll give the difference to the retreat centre." Yeah! We made a couple of $1,000 for our retreat centre there. Now we saved them a lot of messing around trying to find a plasma screen TV. But you try that out. If you have a plasma screen TV, you've got a small TV, then what's the difference when you're actually watching it? Does it really appear in your mind different when you're watching the movie or watching the whatever else you watch, the TV series? Is it the case when you're plasma screen TV, you can actually, when you're watching, you actually see more in your mind? The answer is no. It's just when it's turned off it looks bigger. When it's turned on, it always looks the same size in your mind. Because what happens when you see a TV, the edges of the screen disappear because you're focusing on what's important in the middle. And because the edges of the screen disappear, you forget sometimes you're just watching a TV or watching a movie. Because you're just seeing the centre over there, it's just like real life. We just see the centre of your field of vision here. Which means that it gives it a sense of reality, which is why sometimes, just when the man and the woman finally meet together, oh, you start crying, oh, isn't it so sweet? It's only a movie, for goodness sake. Or someone gets killed, and you go, they get killed, what's going to happen next? Why are you getting involved? Because you can't see the edges of the screen. If you see the edges of the screen, you'll always realise this is just movie, it's just fantasy. So anyway, understanding that simile of the screen, you always notice that what you pay attention to gets into the centre, and everything on the edge just falls away. You don't know when it falls away. It's not some sort of line, and when it goes over it, suddenly disappears. It fades away on the edges. When you understand that simile, the reason why we have distractions is, say, when we're watching the breath and someone starts to snore, the snoring takes the centre of our screen, becomes the most important, and that's what we hear, and the breath falls off the screen. Or we've got the sound of the birds, and the bird forms the centre of our screen, and everything else falls off. All one needs to do to focus and deal with distractions is to remember to keep your meditation object in the centre of your screen. So there, say you're watching the breath. My breath is in the centre. I can hear the snoring, but it's not in the centre, it's on the edges somewhere. I can feel my legs aching, but that's over there somewhere. My breath is in the centre. And that way, whatever you centre on remains. And what's on the edges of the screen just falls away from your awareness. After a while you just don't hear the snoring. After a while you don't feel the pain. You don't hear the noise outside. Because you're focused on the centre and you stay and go deeper into that centre. That's the nature. There's an old story I tell every retreat, but it's a great story and I'll tell it again now. The story of the three archers learning meditation, focusing through the power of archery, and one day their master decided to give them a test. So he took the bow and arrow, he took them into the forest, and he pointed out on a branch of a tree a long way away there was a bird sitting. And the master said, look, that's not a real bird, that's just a dummy, like a doll, a stuffed toy, because we won't hurt a real bird. But this is a test for you. You've got to shoot that bird with one of these arrows. And they say, oh, it's too far away. We can't shoot it. This is a test, and it's not anywhere in that bird. You have to shoot that bird through the left eyeball. It's impossible, they said. It's hard enough to shoot that bird anywhere, let alone through one particular part of its body. And the master said, it is difficult, but if you know how to focus on the target, and make yourself one with that target, the left eyeball of the bird, you'll be able to do it. It's a test of focusing and meditation. So he gave the bow and arrow to the first student and told him, take your time to meditate, to focus on your target. But before you shoot, give me a sign, because I want to ask you a question. So that young man meditated on the target, the left eyeball of that bird, a long way away, for about half an hour. And then he gave the sign. He was ready to shoot. And the master asked him this question, student, can you see the bird on the tree without even moving any muscle except around the mouth? The student said, yes, master. And the master said, stupid student, pushed him away, grabbed the bow and arrow and told him to go and learn some meditation properly this time. He didn't know what he'd done wrong. So he gave the bow and arrow to student number 2, the same instruction. You've got to focus on the target. Make yourself one with the target. Take your time. And when you're ready to shoot, give me a sign. So he put the arrow in the bow, aimed it at the left eyeball of the bird, a long way away, focused and meditated and focused and meditated. for 1 whole hour. And when he was ready to shoot, he gave a sign. And the master said again, "Student, can you see the bird on the tree?" And without moving, the student said, "What tree?" "Ah," said the master, "can you see the bird?" "Yes, master." Stupid student. And pushed him away, took the bow and arrow again. "Go with your mate and learn some more meditation." And he gave the bow and arrow to student number 3. There's always 3 students in these. 3 students, 3 this, 3 that. There's always 3 in Buddhism. So he gave it to the 3rd student. Same instructions, make yourself one with the target. When you're one with the target, give me a sign. 2 whole hours he meditated on the left eyeball of the bird. And he gave a sign. He was ready to shoot. "Can you see the bird on the tree?" said the master. "No, master," said the student. "Can you see the bird?" "What bird?" said the student. And for the first time the master smiled. "If you can't see the tree, you can't see the bird. What can you see, student?" "All I can see, master, is 1 eyeball." "Cool, awesome," said the master. "Shoot." And of course, the arrow went through the only thing which was in that student's vision. The left eyeball of that bird. He'd focused. And that story actually comes apparently from the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu tradition. And it's a wonderful story because it actually shows what it is to focus. When you first start, you see so much. You're watching, say, the breath, you can see the body, the snoring, the sounds, the feelings in the body, but you keep focused, keep that in the center. If you stay long enough focusing in the center, everything on the periphery disappears. So when you're watching the breath, you can hear sounds, you can actually have even thoughts on the background, feelings in the body, but after a while, they fall off the screen. You don't know when they fall off the screen, or when sound disappears, or when the body disappears. But after a while, all you know is just the breath going in, the breath going out. There's nothing else left. You can't say where that breath is. Is the bird on the tree? What tree? What body? All you have is just the breath going in and the breath going out. That's called focusing. It's the meaning of the word samadhi, one-pointedness. And it also means that you can have these distractions, you know how to deal with them. Just don't center on them, for goodness sake. They can be there, but it's not important. So you can hear the sounds, you can feel the body, but because you don't give them worth, importance and value, they're on the edges. What you do give worth and value to, the breath, is in the center. And then the breath starts to fill up the whole screen, so all you can see is the breath. Breath going in, breath going out. Now by that time it should already be pretty nice, because you've simplified things. And again, the energy of the mind is only going into knowing. You can't do very much. At this time, sometimes people think, where's my body gone? It's really strange that I remember one person I was giving a retreat in Singapore, they got very afraid. They were about to run off away from the retreat because they couldn't feel their hands anymore. I said, what do you want to run away for? You're getting somewhere. Great, get back and get rid of the rest of your body as well while you're at it. But because of the first time they'd actually lost awareness of their body, they got a bit scared. But this is what you're supposed to do, and you do feel that. You can't feel your hands. My goodness, where are the hands? Where are my legs gone? You can't move anything. You're beautifully stuck there, having a wonderful time. So don't be afraid. The hands are still there afterwards. You'll be able to move afterwards. No, you won't be taken away to hospital when you leave here. You'll be able to walk, I guarantee that. All is happening to you is just you're getting so still, the mind is actually letting go of the body. And you're going focusing, it's falling off. And sometimes you just can't hear the sounds, they just disappear. There's this great story about this young novice monk in Thailand with Ajahn Chah a few years ago, when Ajahn Chah was still talking, giving lectures. And one evening Ajahn Chah was giving one of these long talks. And I was there with Ajahn Chah. And many people say to me, it must have been so wonderful to have lived with such a great teacher. And I said, yes and no. Because what you think of as a great teacher is because you read all these books, with the great sayings of Ajahn Chah. But in real life, living with that monk, you had to wait for hours just for one of those little sayings. Because he would be so boring many times. He'd go on and on and on and on. In Thai, sometimes in Lao, with a lot of rubbish, ordinary stuff. But every now and again he'd say something profound. What you have now in those books is the profound stuff with all the dross taken out. It's refined like refined gold instead of with all the other stuff. And so monks like me, we had to sit through that. Sometimes 5 or 6, 7 hours talk. Now, it's okay if you're a monk because, you had a bit of endurance. But in these temples, they always had these little novices as well. And sometimes the novices were there. We had one novice because in our temple because his mother was killed by his father, and he was in his mother's arms at the time when his father bashed her head in. So he had all these tragic stories of basically children who were homeless, had no one to look after them. So they'd go to the temples, and the temples would look after them and care for them. And when they got to about 16, they'd go and leave and go and find a girlfriend, get married. But at least they got an upbringing. They got cared for like an orphanage. So there's always a few young novices around. And there was this one about 10 or 11-year-old novice. And after about 1 or 2 hours of Ajahn Chah droning on, he got very bored. And especially it was late at night. He wanted to sleep. It's okay for these grown-ups to stay up late at night, but he's only a 10, 11-year-old. He needed sleep. He was in his genes to sleep. So he was getting really upset with Ajahn Chah. And he apparently kept on thinking, when is Ajahn Chah going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? And it became like a mantra, like these old broken records. Again, when is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? When is he going to stop? And after a couple of hours, remember what I said about pressing the letting go button? Just a slight change of attitude. He just changed that mantra around. Instead of when is Ajahn Chah going to stop, he thought, just for a moment, when am I going to stop? And that's when he stopped. When he opened his eyes, it was about 3 or 4 hours later, maybe 5 hours later, because it was early morning, and all the monks had left. Ajahn Chah had left. Before they left, they must have rang the gong, done some chanting. He hadn't heard anything of that. He got into this really blissful meditation for the first time in his young life. So happy, because he had stopped. Remember I say about letting go, don't doing anything? He'd actually pressed that stop button and gone into a deep state of meditation. And the most important part of that story is he couldn't hear anything. Couldn't feel any aches and pains in his body. He was completely deep inside, having a wonderful time. All that other stuff had fallen off his screen. And he was having a wonderful time deep inside. So this is what's supposed to happen. Your body is supposed to disappear. The sounds are supposed to just fade away, as long as you keep focusing in the center. So when that happens to you, great, you're getting somewhere. You can't feel the body, you can't feel the head, you can't hear anything. Oh, peace at last. Even those people who've got aches and pains, bad back, bad gut, bad whatever else, it's such a relief to drop all that away and just to go deep inside. So that's what happens when you focus. So, to be able to get to that focus, see the beauty and joy in things. As you go deeper, you get to this beautiful breath, and it fills the whole mind, so you can't hear sounds, you can't feel your body. You just got this beautiful breath, and you go inside of that. You focus inside of that, because the most important part of the beautiful breath is not the breath, but it's the beauty, the feeling, the emotion of joy. And it's a natural thing that you'll focus on that, because that's the nice part, that's the juicy part, that's the sweet part. And as you go into the beauty, the breath falls off your screen. You don't know whether you're breathing in or breathing out. You can't feel the breath anymore. And again, when that happens, don't get afraid. Don't think, I'm not breathing. Not breathing means I'm dead. I don't want to die, I'm too young. Got too many things to do in life. You don't die that easy on a retreat. You are still alive. Just you can't feel the breath. Just like when the hands disappear, you just can't feel your hands. They're still there. So the breath is still going in and out, but just you've moved away from it, so you can't feel it. And it's at that point
where these beautiful nimittas arise. Because the breath and the body has faded away, you've actually let go of the 5 senses and your body. And the only sense left is called the mind. This is the point of this meditation. To be able to let go so much that the 5 senses of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting and touching, and the body, which it knows, completely vanishes from your perceptual field. So all you have left is the mind. You're going deep within. When you go that deep within, that's when the nimittas arise. Because the nimitta, this beautiful light, is nothing more than a reflection of your mind, your citta, the 6th sense. And it's always very beautiful. Just as the Buddha said, this mind, monks, is radiant. When it's not clouded over by these defilements which come from outside of it. And there you have your radiant mind. You're sitting there in this beautiful light, like people say a flashlight right in front of your face, car headlights, or you think it's like the sun has come up and you're facing the sun, or the moon is in your eyes. Very bright and very beautiful and very brilliant. That's called the nimitta stage. And that's an important stage to get to in meditation. Sometimes that nimitta comes up early and you can still feel a bit of the body or hear some sounds. But again, they're like the edge of the screen. Keep them on the edge. Make sure your nimitta is right in the center. And don't allow the attention, what's that sound, and move off to the sound. Keep in the center with the nimitta. You can hear those things on the edge, yeah, but they're not important. The nimitta is most important. Now it's that time when you have the nimitta, the mindfulness must remember, if not before. You don't have to worry about the beauty in that image anymore, because the beauty in that image is already sort of very, very strong. What you have to really be concerned about now is to take that mindfulness and focus it not on the object. Remember, first of all, you focus it on the space between you and the object. Then you focus it on the object. Now you focus it on the one who's watching. Because that one who's watching, that's actually the source of that reflection, that nimitta, that beautiful light. That nimitta is a reflection of the citta, the knower. To be able to develop that nimitta, the most skillful piece of advice is to put your mindfulness, not on the nimitta out here, but on the person who's watching. And keep that still and stop it getting excited or afraid. So now the mindfulness remembers to watch the one who's watching. To keep that still. Calm it down. Make it absolutely motionless. As Ajahn Brahm said in this amazing simile, which can never be beaten, it's the simile of the still forest pool. When you get to those deep stages of meditation, you have to have the subtlety and the stillness of an Ajahn Brahm in this story. When he used to go wandering through the jungles of Thailand, seeking for solitude or wise masters to ask questions of, it was always the custom to find a piece of water, a river, a lake, or even a well, around about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. Because you would need to wash. A few times when I went wandering, Tudong as I used to call it, some days after 3 days, if you hadn't found any water, you felt so dirty and so sticky and awful. Because you're in the tropics and it's dusty and it's hot and you sweat. And just 2 or 3 days without a bath, let alone what other people think of you with all your smells, but you feel terrible. So it's used the custom to find some water about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, to bathe, also to get some water for drinking, and lastly to maybe wash some robes, because those robes get stinky as well, sweating all day. So you find some water to bathe, wash, whatever. And then afterwards you set up your mosquito net umbrella, maybe about 20 meters or so from the edge of the pool, depends. You don't want to go on the edge of the pool, because that evening that's where the animals come. You go away from the edge of the pool. And Ajahn Brahm used to do that so often. He used to tell this story that sometimes he'd be having washed and bathed, he'd sit under his mosquito net, and sometimes instead of meditating, he'd just watch the animals come and play. It's great fun watching animals play. Many of you have played with the woolly wagtails outside. They give you a lot of joy. I remember in this one monastery in the north of Thailand where I was spending the rains retreat, I'd leave a bowl of water out there for the birds in the evening, and I could actually hide in my hut, and a knot hole in the wood of my hut, I could look through that and spy the little animals, coming up for that water. And every evening, once they get to know there was water there, and it was a dry part of the forest, they'd all come in the evening, and they would actually line up. There was actually a queue. There were very, very well-behaved birds in the north of Thailand. They had a nice queue, and of course the first person, or the bird who went there first, would actually get in there, wash, pluck its wings, drink a little bit, and fly away, and the next bird would get in. And they were so well ordered, having a nice queue, but every now and again there would be one bird who would come and jump the queue. There's always people like that, even in human world. And as soon as it jumped the queue, all the other birds would jump on it and beat it up and make it fly away. It was so funny to watch. When you actually see animals behaving like human beings, it's just delightful. It's like, a National Geographic channel, in your own little hut. You can just watch it through the window of a knothole in the wood. They're great fun just watching animals play and muck around. So that's what Ajahn Chah used to do. He used to watch his animals play by the pool, because they go and drink and they'd fight each other and they'd sport around. But they would only come out and play when they couldn't notice Ajahn Chah. If they knew there was a human being watching, they wouldn't even come out to drink, no matter how thirsty they were. Because in that part of Thailand, the human beings were the hunters. And if any animal smelled a human being, they would run away, because very often the human beings would have killed them and ate them. They didn't know Ajahn Chah was a monk. He was just a human being, smelt the same. That's why he'd have to be absolutely still. They'd come out and sniff around. They'd look and listen. If they couldn't hear anything or smell anything, then they'd go and drink. So he said he had to be still for those animals to come out. He said sometimes it was so still, after the ordinary animals came out, then these very rare and special animals would come out. The ones who were so shy and sensitive of human beings that very few humans had ever seen such animals. I remember him saying these were such beautiful and amazing animals that not even his parents told them that such beautiful and rare animals existed. And they'd only come out to play by the pool when it was absolutely still. If he moved even an eyelid, they would know, and they'd go straight back into the forest and hide there for months. They were that shy. And he said that simile applies to the nimittas and the jhanas. These are very rare and shy animals which come out from the forest and play by the still forest pool that is your mind. They'll only stay when you're absolutely still. Because when they come out, it's like the nimitta sniffs around. Is anybody watching? And if you are, then they'll run away again. You have to be that passive that the nimittas don't know that someone's watching. If you say, wow, or cool, far out, they will know and they'll run away straight away. As many of you had that experience. And then when it comes up, it flashes and it goes immediately. Why? Because you moved. So when they come up, you've got to be like an Ajahn Chah, so still. Like the burglar, like the secret agent, the James Bond of Buddhism, absolutely still. Well, that's not really a good simile, James Bond, but I think you get to understand what I mean. So still, and these things come up, and if you're still, they'll stay. And especially the jhanas, you've got to be so absolutely still that nothing moves. And then they'll come and play by the still forest pool that is your mind. Even in Western psychology, that is a symbol, a primeval symbol of the mind, a clear lake of water. And Ajahn Chah used that. So this is how we focus at this last stage. we pay attention to the one who's watching and making sure we are still. That's all we need to do. So there's 3 ways of focusing on what we focus on at the different levels of meditation. Beginning, just focus on the space between you and the object. Make sure you're not doing anything. You're being at peace, you're being kind, you're being just gentle, just allowing things to be, letting things develop. Once the mindfulness gets strong enough, you can hold an object and put some of that mindfulness into the beauty and worth of the object. So the breath actually looks beautiful because you're seeing it as beautiful, and it stays. And other stuff, by saying it's most worthwhile, you're putting it in the center of the screen, and other stuff is on the edge of the screen, so it falls off. And allow it to fall off, because it's a focusing deep into the center of things. And when you get to nimitta stage, don't worry about what you're watching anymore, because it's already beautiful enough. Now you just have to put your attention to the one who's watching. Focus mindfulness on there, and keep that like an Ajahn Brahm, so still in the forest pool of your mind. So that's some advice on focusing. Any questions? Yep.
Can a nimitta come up at any time or any stage of the meditation?
Can a nimitta come up at any stage of meditation? Yes, it can, but a lot of time it's a waste of time at that time. It's not a real nimitta, it's not a useful one. It's okay, the mind is sort of flashing up, but you won't be able to sustain it. And you haven't done the groundwork yet. So because you haven't done the groundwork, it's like, sure, you can paint the wall before scrubbing it down, filling in the gaps, and sort of sandpapering it, but you don't get a nice finish. Sometimes the paint peels off. Sure, you can build a sort of a 10-story house on the sand. It goes up very quickly, but the first bit of wind and it all falls over again. So you need that foundation, which is why we go stage by stage by stage. So if a nimitta comes up earlier, just ignore it and go back to your meditation object. That time it's a distraction. Don't keep it in don't put it in the center of your screen. So it's a nimitta, okay, you can just be at the edge of the screen if you like, but it's not the time for you yet. Yes, John, and then afterwards.
I think at an early stage, when the mind becomes bored of the breath, it takes up other objects, maybe a finish or something, or whatever, past or future that seems more interesting. How do you actually have the breath get regenerated as more beautiful than the object in the mind's result?
Okay, you're saying that you're watching the breath and it gets a bit boring and sort of start losing it. How can you give more beauty into the breath? Like sometimes you can just play around and look for beauty and just see its worth, understand how important it is and how it's giving you a lot of happiness in the past because it's led to these deep stages of meditation. Remember, just because I'm watching the breath, I don't have to think of all these other problems I have in my life. So you start to appreciate it more, and sometimes you learn that appreciation through a commentary. Basically, you convince yourself it's worthy. However, if that doesn't work, it means the mindfulness is not really strong enough yet. So that's why you just make some more peace. Oh, if it wants to wander off, fine, that's okay. And if you want to think of something else, fine. Because then you actually, instead of trying to focus the mindfulness to see the beauty in something, you're actually creating more stillness, more peace, to actually get that mindfulness stronger so it can see beautiful. It can have the power to see the beauty. Maybe it's not powerful enough yet.
So there's a very clear crossroad there where if you can't reinvest and do a little side job on the breath then you need to go back into like an acceptance of whatever it is.
Correct.
The breath is going to float off on something else.
That's right. It's just you're going almost like a transition here. Whether is the mindfulness really strong enough so that you can actually see beauty in the breath, or is it still too weak and you just need to increase the power of the mindfulness? And sometimes you can just have to do that by trial and error. Sometimes you get sensitive, you know exactly what you can do. And so the best thing to do is to try and see the beauty in the breath, and if it doesn't work, then I just make peace. Open the door of your heart, whatever happens. Create the greater mindfulness.
have, first of all,
does a limiter always come as a bright white light? Can it come in different colours?
Can come in different colours, yes.
A sign or shape?
Limiters can come in all shapes and sizes and colours. The most important thing with the limiters is they're beautiful. And the real limiters, they're colours which don't exist in the real world. They're brighter, more brilliant, more rich. If it's like a white, it's just so much more white than you could ever see in the world. Purer, deeper, richer.
Does it take up the whole?
Sometimes it takes up the whole image, sometimes the best ones will only take up a part of the image, like a sun or a moon. They're usually the best. They're more focused, more concentrated. However, it doesn't matter which one it is. You just allow it to be and see what happens. You make sure that you, the one who's watching, doesn't do anything. Yes. Pamela. Is it you? No. Oh, it's Pauline, yes.
There are 3 stages of focusing. The last one you say when the mind is very still and the body fades and the feeling fades away. And then you see that's where we turn the object back to the observer.
Yeah, turn the mindfulness to the observer.
The observer already dropped out. Like for instance, when my mind was so still, and it was so still that I could not feel anything, and suddenly I found that my eyes could not open. It was so tight that I just wonder what happened.
Good.
I shifted the attention to that. But is that the object you're talking about?
No. What happened there? That you're saying that you were meditating and that you got so still you couldn't even open your eyes? That's the body disappearing. And so your connection with the body is being severed. So, you can't open the eyes. You can't do anything with the body because, you're somewhere else and the body's somehow distant from you. Sometimes you can't even feel it. When you can't feel it, you don't know what you have to do. So that's a good sign. It means the body has disappeared. So don't even try to open your eyes, just stay inside. But when the breath has really disappeared and gone, you can always use a framework, the watcher, the observer, and the observed. Like Pauline is looking at Ajahn Brahm. Pauline, the observer. Ajahn Brahm, the observed. And instead of worrying about what I'm doing, you have to see how still you can be as you observe. So you don't move at all. Like the Ajahn Chah sitting there watching the animals. He doesn't move his body, but here that's only a metaphor. Because here there's no body left, you're not moving the mind. The knower, consciousness, mindfulness gets more and more still. So when you focus, you can understand what that is. Use that as your metaphor. Is somebody looking at this? A mind watching its object. And if you just focus on the object, another simile which I gave, it might help, is it was a great revelation and a great help to my meditation to realize that nimitta, that light which comes up in meditation, was a reflection of my mind. That's actually what it was. It was like you look in a mirror to see your face, especially when you're shaving in the morning. And now, in this state of meditation, it's as if you were the mind was looking at a reflection of itself. And that image, that nimitta, that light was a reflection of my mind. But it was moving backwards and forwards. And every now and again I try and stop it moving, as if you were trying to hold it. And it would never stop. And then once I realized this was a reflection of the knower, I realized the reason why it was moving, because I was moving, the one who was watching was moving. And so when I put more attention, instead of the image of the nimitta, but the person who was watching it, and kept that still, then the nimitta was still. And I use the simile again, when you're looking at your image in the mirror in the morning, and the image in the mirror is moving backwards and forwards. It's a waste of time holding the mirror still. Because that's what I was doing. Instead of holding the mirror still, you, in front of the mirror, you be still. And then the image will be still.
But is that object, the observer, is that the observer the mind or the mind Yes.
So mind is the observer, yeah. So the mind is being still. So hopefully when you get to those stages of nimitta and it's not working, hopefully that piece of advice will actually help. Ajahn Chah put attention on himself, making it absolutely still, so those animals will come out and stay. Sorry? No, nothing to do with the body. In the simile, it's the body. Ajahn Chah was looking at his body, but in that deep state of meditation, you've got no body left, it's disappeared. The mind is becoming still. So your mind is not going to move. So you pay attention on this thing which is watching, and keep that motionless. Yes, Chankatana. Yeah, the crossover, usually just when you're starting watching the breath, and your mindfulness becomes strong enough that you can watch the breath, sort of a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, without basically losing any breath. So you've got very strong mindfulness. So you're peaceful, you're calm, so you can watch this breath pretty easily. And then, you sort of start to, you've got enough peace, but to get really into it, to see the beauty in that breath, see its worth. So it's just a matter of a bit of trial and error. Find out when to stop making so much peace. And mindfulness is pretty strong. You're enjoying yourself. You feel like you're awake. You enjoy the sounds of the birds outside, the feeling of the grass under your feet. You're aware. You're awake. And then when you can watch the breath, you just see the beauty in that breath. And it's easy to focus on it. You go into it.